"Mr. Cole, rise for the Honorable Judge Kennedy," the bailiff bellowed, his voice bouncing off the mahogany panels. The entire courtroom stood. Lawyers, victims, reporters, everyone except the man in the Italian silk suit. Sebastian Cole didn't just sit. He reclined, checking his diamond-encrusted watch with a bored sigh. "I said rise." The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt. Sebastian smirked, locking eyes with the black woman ascending the bench. "I don't rise for diversity hires," he said, his voice carrying a lethal, quiet arrogance that sucked the air out of the room. "I'm paying for this circus. Why should I stand for the clown?" The silence that followed Sebastian Cole's declaration was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and tasted of ozone. It was the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Judge Hayden Kennedy settled into her high-backed leather chair with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator that knows it has no natural enemies. She adjusted the sleeves of her robe, her movements precise. She did not look angry. She did not look flushed. If anything, the corners of her mouth twitched with a terrifying calmness. She looked down at the billionaire sprawled at the defense table, a man who owned half the skyline of Chicago, a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries. "Mr. Hale," Judge Kennedy said, her voice a rich, resonant contralto that reached the back of the gallery without amplification. She didn't address the billionaire. She addressed his lawyer, Gavin Hale. "Is your client medically incapacitated? Perhaps his legs have ceased to function due to the weight of his ego?" Gavin Hale, a man whose skin seemed perpetually greased with nervous sweat despite his exorbitant retainer fee, scrambled to stand. He shot a desperate look at Sebastian. "Your Honor, my client he is merely tired. The stress of the indictment—" "I'm not tired, Gavin," Sebastian interrupted, not shifting his gaze from the judge. He tapped his fingers on the polished oak table. "I'm bored. Let's get on with this farce so I can get back to making the money that taxes pay your salary, Your Honor." The gallery gasped. In the back row, Archer Payne, an elderly man with calloused hands and a spine bent by decades of labor, gripped the wooden pew in front of him until his knuckles turned white. Beside him, Jace Young, Sebastian's estranged son, lowered his head, his jaw working furiously as he tried to disappear into his hoodie. Judge Kennedy slowly removed her reading glasses. She placed them on the bench. The soft clack sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "Mr. Cole," she said, finally addressing him, "you operate under the delusion that this courtroom is a boardroom. You believe that power is derived from the balance in your offshore accounts. In here, the only currency is the law. And right now, you are overdrawn." Sebastian chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Hold me in contempt. Fine me. I'll write the check before lunch. It's a rounding error to me." "Oh, I have no doubt you can afford a fine," Kennedy said, opening the case file before her. "But you are mistaken about the nature of the transaction. You are not here to negotiate a deal. You are here because 3 children are dead, Mr. Cole. You are here to answer for the collapse of the Cole Horizon tenement." "Alleged collapse," Gavin squeaked. "The building is flat, Mr. Hale." "Gravity is not an allegation," Kennedy snapped, her eyes flashing. She turned back to Sebastian. "Since you refuse to show the court the requisite respect, and since you seem to believe your time is more valuable than the lives lost, we will proceed differently. Bailiff." The bailiff, a burly man named Officer Miller who had seen everything in 20 years of service, stepped forward. "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Cole finds his chair too comfortable," Kennedy said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel wrapped in velvet. "Remove it." Sebastian blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Kennedy said, picking up her pen. "If you will not stand out of respect, you will stand out of necessity. Officer Miller, remove the defendant's chair. He will stand for the duration of today's proceedings. If he attempts to sit on the floor, you will hold him up." "This is absurd," Sebastian roared, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. I have rights. This is cruel and unusual. Cruel? Kennedy interrupted, her gaze piercing him. Cruel is burying families under cheap concrete to save 3% on construction costs. Standing up for 2 hours is merely exercise. Move the chair. Officer Miller grabbed the back of Sebastian's expensive leather chair and yanked it away. Sebastian stumbled, his balance compromised, forced to catch himself on the table. He stood there, stripped of his repose, looking suddenly smaller. Now, Judge Kennedy said, putting her glasses back on. Docket number 44B, the People versus Sebastian Cole. Charges: 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 12 counts of criminal negligence. How does the defendant plead? Sebastian straightened his jacket, smoothing the lapels with trembling hands. His eyes burned with a hatred so pure it felt radioactive. He leaned into the microphone. Not guilty, he spat. And when I walk out of here, I'm going to buy this courthouse and turn it into a parking lot. Noted, Kennedy said, not looking up. Prosecution, your opening statement. The heat in the courtroom was rising, despite the aggressive humming of the air conditioning units. It smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and the distinct metallic tang of fear coming from Gavin Hale. Sebastian Cole stood. His legs ached, not from exertion, but from the sheer indignity of it. He was a man who hadn't stood in a line or waited for a table in 30 years. He was the architect of the modern world, a titan of industry. To be commanded by a woman he viewed as a political affirmative action token was an insult that burned in his gut like swallowed acid. He tuned out the prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Darrow who was droning on about structural integrity and falsified permits. Sebastian knew the facts. He just didn't care. The Cole Horizon project was meant to be a tax write-off, a low-income housing initiative to appease the city council so he could rezone the waterfront for his luxury condos. So the concrete was a lower grade, so the rebar was recycled. It was the storm of the century that brought it down, not him. It was an act of God, and Sebastian Cole considered himself a peer of the divine, not a subordinate. He looked past the prosecutor to the gallery. He saw his son, Jace. The boy, no. The man, he was 25 now, wore a tattered denim jacket and looked like he hadn't showered in days. Jace was an activist, a professional complainer who had changed his last name to Young to distance himself from the family fortune. Coward, Sebastian thought. I built an empire for you and you play in the dirt. Then his eyes shifted to the man beside Jace. Archer Payne, the plaintiff. A nobody. A retired janitor who had lived on the 3rd floor of the Horizon. He had lost his wife and 2 grandchildren when the ceiling gave way. Archer was staring at Sebastian with a stillness that was unnerving. Most people looked at Sebastian with envy or fear. Archer looked at him with pity. It infuriated Sebastian. Don't pity me, old man. I could buy your life 1,000 times over. Mr. Cole? Sebastian snapped his head back to the bench. Judge Kennedy was watching him. Mr. Darrow asked you a question, Kennedy said. I have advised my client not to answer, Gavin Hale interjected quickly. It wasn't a question regarding the case facts, Mr. Hale, Kennedy said dryly. Mr. Darrow asked if the defendant requires water. He looks flushed. I don't need water, Sebastian snarled. I need a mistrial. This... He gestured to the empty space behind him where his chair should be. Is prejudice. You are biased against me because of who I am. And who are you, Mr. Cole? Kennedy asked. She leaned forward, her elbows on the bench. Are you the man who signed the permits? Or are you the man who claimed in his deposition that he delegates all minutiae to subordinates? I am a job creator, Sebastian said, puffing his chest. I am the reason half the people in this city have roofs over their heads. The irony of that statement is not lost on this court, Kennedy said, considering we are here because a roof you provided crushed 3 people to death. Sebastian slammed his hand on the table. That was an accident, a tragic, unavoidable accident caused by a freak storm. The storm was a Category 1 hurricane, Mr. Cole. A voice rose from the back. It was Archer Payne. He had stood up. Order, Kennedy said, but her voice was gentle. He knew, Archer said, his voice trembling not with age, but with suppressed rage. He pointed a shaking finger at Sebastian. We told the management. We told them the walls were cracking. We told them the water tasted like lime. He knew. Sit down, old man, Sebastian shouted, turning around. You signed the lease. You took the risk. Mr. Cole! Kennedy's gavel banged, a sharp crack that silenced the room. Turn around, now! Sebastian turned, breathing hard. Mr. Payne, I understand your pain, but you must speak only when called to the stand, Kennedy said. However, Mr. Cole, you just addressed a victim of this tragedy with aggression. Strike one. Strike one? Sebastian laughed incredulously. Is this a baseball game? No, Kennedy said, her eyes dark. In baseball, you get 3 strikes. In my courtroom, you get 2. Do not test the second one. Sebastian felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. This woman wasn't playing the game. She wasn't looking for a bribe or a favor. She wasn't intimidated by his legal team. She was looking at him like he was a structural flaw that needed to be corrected. He glanced at the court reporter, a young woman named Kai Mitchell. Her fingers were flying across the steno machine, capturing every word. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable, and then back down. The record. They were building a record. Sebastian leaned over to Gavin. Get the dirt on her, he whispered harshly. Kennedy, I want everything. Who she sleeps with, what she owes, where her kids go to school. Find the leverage. Gavin swallowed hard. Sebastian, she's clean. We looked. She's known as the Iron Maiden for a reason. Everyone has a price, Gavin, Sebastian hissed. Or a secret. Find it. Or I'll find a lawyer who can. The trial dragged into the afternoon. Sebastian's legs were burning. The muscles in his lower back seized up. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his impeccable posture deteriorating into a slouch. Every time he slumped, Officer Miller took a half-step forward and Sebastian straightened up out of sheer spite. The prosecution called their first expert witness, a structural engineer named Dr. Aris Thorne. Thorne was a small, nervous man who adjusted his glasses every 3 seconds. Dr. Thorne, Darrow asked, projecting a blueprint onto the screen. Can you explain to the jury what grade C cement is? It's a filler mix, Thorne stammered. Usually used for sidewalks or non-load-bearing walls, not for a 10-story residential foundation. And what did you find in the rubble of the Cole Horizon? Grade C, Thorne whispered. 80% grade C. And the rebar? Rusted. Pre-used. Darrow let that hang in the air. Dr. Thorne, who signed off on the material substitution? Who authorized the switch from the safety-grade materials to these cheaper alternatives? Thorne hesitated. He looked at Sebastian. Sebastian narrowed his eyes. A silent threat broadcast across the room. Remember who pays your firm's retainer. It was a clerical error, Thorne lied. The lie was so obvious it practically had a smell. The subcontractor made a mistake. A mistake that saved the Cole Development Group $4 million? Darrow pressed. Objection, Gavin Hale stood up. Speculation. Sustained, Kennedy said. Stick to the facts, Mr. Darrow. Dr. Thorne, Judge Kennedy cut in, bypassing the lawyers. She leaned over the bench, staring down at the witness. You are under oath. You are a licensed engineer. Are you telling this court that a subcontractor independently decided to order illegal materials without the approval of the general contractor? Thorne looked at the judge, then at Sebastian. He was sweating profusely. I cannot speak to the internal communications of the Cole Group, Thorne said weakly. Judge Kennedy stared at him for a long moment. Very well. She turned her gaze to Sebastian. He was checking his phone. He held it below the table, texting his PR team to spin the Grade C narrative as an industry standard practice. Kennedy didn't say a word. She simply extended her hand. Phone, she said. Sebastian looked up. What? You are texting in my courtroom. Bring it here. This is my personal property. It contains privileged business information. Officer Miller, Kennedy said. The bailiff moved with surprising speed. He snatched the phone from Sebastian's hand before the billionaire could react. He walked it up to the bench and handed it to Kennedy. Let's see, Kennedy said, tapping the screen. It wasn't locked. Sebastian was too arrogant for passcodes. Text to PR Jenkins. Buy the engineer's firm if he wobbles. Offer him a consultant gig in Dubai. Get him out of the country. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. Gavin Hale put his head in his hands. That is privileged, Sebastian shouted, forgetting his pain, forgetting the chair. You cannot read that. I just did, Kennedy said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Mr. Cole, this is witness tampering. This is obstruction of justice. This is a felony committed in open court right in front of my face. It's business, Sebastian argued, though his voice cracked slightly. It's contingency planning. Kennedy slowly placed the phone into an evidence bag. Mr. Hale, your client has just provided the prosecution with fresh evidence. I am holding this device until a forensic team can download its contents. You can't do that. Sebastian lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the judge's bench. Back! Officer Miller shouted, grabbing Sebastian's shoulder and wrenching him back. Sebastian shook him off, straightening his suit. You are trying to ruin me because you resent me. You resent my success. You people are all the same. We people? Kennedy asked, her eyebrows raising. You bureaucrats, Sebastian corrected, catching himself. But the damage was done. The racial slur hung in the air, unspoken, but heard by everyone. Kennedy stood up. For the first time, she stood. She wasn't tall, but she loomed over the room like a mountain. Mr. Cole, she said, you have mistaken my patience for weakness. You have mistaken my adherence to the law for a lack of power. You believe that because you built the skyline, you own the sky. You are about to learn gravity applies to everyone. She looked at the bailiff. Revoke his bail. What? Gavin shrieked. Your Honor, this is a civil criminal hybrid case. He is not a flight risk. He is a public figure. He just attempted to bribe a witness via text message 5 feet from the bench, Kennedy said. He is an obstruction risk. Remand the defendant to custody. And Officer Miller? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cole is accustomed to the finest accommodations. Please ensure he is placed in the general holding cell. No private suite, no special treatment. He stays there until the trial concludes. Sebastian's jaw dropped. You can't put me in general. Do you know who I am? They'll kill me in there. Then I suggest you learn to make friends quickly, Kennedy said. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. She banged the gavel. As Officer Miller produced a pair of handcuffs, Sebastian Cole stared at the black woman on the bench. For the first time in his life, his money was silent. The metal cuffs clicked around his wrists, cold and biting. Archer Payne watched from the back row, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Jace Young stood up, looked at his father being led away, and for the first time in years, he didn't look ashamed. He looked ready. But Judge Kennedy wasn't done. As she gathered her files, she looked at the court reporter, Kai. Keep the transcript precise, Ms. Mitchell, Kennedy murmured. The appeal will be ferocious, but the truth will be absolute. Sebastian was dragged out the side door, his Italian loafers scuffing against the linoleum, shouting threats that echoed into nothingness. The arrogant billionaire had refused to stand for the judge. Now, he would sleep on a steel cot. And the trial had only just begun. The holding cell at the Cook County Jail did not smell like justice. It smelled of unwashed bodies, industrial disinfectant, and despair. For Sebastian Cole, a man who had his sheets pressed with lavender water daily, the sensory assault was physical torment. He sat on the edge of a steel bench, his knees drawn up, trying to keep his expensive Italian socks from touching the sticky concrete floor. He had not slept. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency that seemed designed to shatter thought. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Judge Kennedy's face, impassive, granite, unyielding. "Cole! Movement!" a guard barked, banging a baton against the bars. Sebastian flinched. He stood, his back stiff. "I need my suit. My lawyers brought my suit." "Bags at the intake," the guard grunted, unlocking the gate. "Hurry up! The Iron Maiden doesn't like to wait." An hour later, Sebastian was back in the courtroom. He was shaved and dressed in a fresh charcoal suit, but the illusion of invincibility was cracked. His eyes were rimmed with red. His hands, usually steady as they signed billion-dollar mergers, had a subtle tremor. He looked at the gallery. It was packed. The story of his jailing had gone viral. The public didn't just want a trial, they wanted a crucifixion. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Sebastian stood. He didn't want to, but the memory of the steel bench was fresh. He stood, but he didn't look at Judge Kennedy. He stared at the empty witness stand. "Be seated," Kennedy said. Her voice was as crisp as the morning air. She looked at Sebastian, noting his fatigue with clinical detachment. "Mr. Hale, call your next witness." Gavin Hale looked like a man walking to the gallows. He shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, the defense reserves its witnesses until the prosecution rests. I believe Mr. Darrow has one final witness." Prosecutor Darrow stood, adjusting his tie. He looked solemn. The people called Jace Young to the stand. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Sebastian froze. He turned slowly to watch his son walk down the center aisle. Jace wasn't wearing his hoodie today. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been bought at a thrift store, but he wore it with a dignity that Sebastian hadn't seen in him since he was a child. Jace took the oath, his voice steady. He sat down and looked directly at his father. There was no love in that look, but there was no hate either. Just a profound, devastating disappointment. "Mr. Young," Darrow began, "please state your relationship to the defendant." "He is my biological father," Jace said. "I was the vice president of operations for Coal Development Group until 2 years ago." "And why did you leave the company?" "Because of the Horizon Project," Jace said. Sebastian gripped the table. "Don't do it, Jace. Don't you dare." "Explain," Darrow said. Jace reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "I was the project manager for the initial phase. When the budget report came in, we were over by 12%. I proposed cutting the landscaping budget. My father, Sebastian, he vetoed it." "What did he suggest instead?" Jace opened the notebook. His hands were shaking slightly now. "Entry dated November 12th. Meeting with the structural team. Sebastian said, and I quote, 'These people are used to living in boxes. They don't need a fortress. They need a roof. Switch the cement specs to the municipal minimum. If the inspector asks, buy him lunch. If he's still hungry, buy him a boat." The courtroom erupted. Gavin Hale jumped up. "Objection! Hearsay! That notebook is not authenticated." "It's a contemporaneous business record," Kennedy ruled instantly. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Young." Jace looked at his father. "I told him it was dangerous. I told him the soil samples showed instability near the riverbank. He told me that I was soft. and that if I didn't sign the order, he'd fire the entire team and replace them with scabs. So you signed it? Darrow asked softly. No, Jace whispered. I quit. I walked out. And I thought he would fix it. I didn't think he'd actually build it. Tears welled in Jace's eyes. I saw the news. I saw the building come down. And I knew. I knew it was the cement. Sebastian felt the eyes of the jury on him. They weren't looking at a titan anymore. They were looking at a monster who would trade lives for a quarterly bonus. Jace! Sebastian hissed, breaking courtroom protocol. You ungrateful little... Mr. Cole! Kennedy's voice cracked like a whip. He's lying! Sebastian shouted, standing up. He's bitter because I cut him off. He wanted to be an artist. He knows nothing about construction. Sit down, Mr. Cole, Kennedy warned. I will not sit down while my own blood commits perjury, Sebastian roared, pointing a finger at his son. I gave you everything. I built that company for you. You built a tomb, Dad, Jace said, his voice breaking. You built a tomb. Sebastian lunged. It was pure instinct, a desire to silence the voice that was tearing his world apart. He moved toward the witness stand. Officer Miller was there in a second. He slammed Sebastian back into his chair, hard. The impact rattled Sebastian's teeth. That is strike two, Mr. Cole, Judge Kennedy said. Her voice was terrifyingly quiet. One more outburst and I will have you gagged, literally gagged. Do you understand? Sebastian panted, straightening his jacket. He looked at Jace. Jace was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. Sebastian realized with a jolt of horror that he had just lost his son forever. Not estranged, lost. Cross-examination? Kennedy asked Gavin. Gavin looked at Sebastian, then at the jury. He knew that attacking the crying son of the defendant would be suicide. No questions, Your Honor, Gavin whispered. Lunch recess was a cage. Sebastian was not allowed to leave the courthouse. He was held in a small consultation room with Gavin. The air was stale, and the sandwich Gavin had brought him remained untouched. We're losing, Gavin said, pacing the small room. Jace's testimony killed us on motive. The jury hates you. Kennedy hates you. Kennedy doesn't matter, Sebastian snapped, though he didn't truly believe it anymore. She's a judge. She has to follow the law. She is the law in that room, Sebastian, and you keep poking the bear. Sebastian stared at the wall. He needed leverage. The Grade C cement was damning, but it was still technically, barely legal for certain structures. The issue was the application. He needed to prove that the collapse was an anomaly, not a systemic failure, or he needed the trial to end. Gavin, Sebastian said, his voice low, the plaintiff, Archer Payne. What about him? He's the face of the victims, the sympathetic grandfather. If he withdraws, if he settles, we can't settle a criminal case, Sebastian. The DA presses the charges, not Payne. The DA needs a victim for the narrative, Sebastian insisted. If Payne goes on TV and says he forgives me or says he doubts the evidence, the jury wavers. Doubt, Gavin. Reasonable doubt. Payne isn't going to forgive you. You called him a nobody in open court. Everyone has a price, Sebastian said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Then remembering his phone was gone. He cursed. I need you to get a message to my private banker. I want a trust opened in Payne's name. 5 million. No, 10. $10 million. Anonymous. This is bribery, Gavin hissed, checking the door. If Kennedy finds out... Kennedy won't find out because you're going to do it right. Sebastian grabbed Gavin's lapels. $10 million, Gavin. The man was a janitor. He can live like a king. He can build a memorial library for his grandkids. Just get him to say he has doubts about the prosecution's structural report. Gavin pulled away, looking sick. I can't do that, Sebastian. I'll be disbarred. You'll be fired if you don't, Sebastian shouted. Do it! Gavin left the room, trembling. Sebastian paced. He felt like a rat in a maze, and the walls were closing in. 10 minutes later, the door opened. But it wasn't Gavin. It was Archer Payne. Sebastian froze. The old man walked in slowly, leaning on a cane. He was accompanied by a bailiff who stood by the door. "What are you doing here?" Sebastian demanded. "You're not supposed to be in here." "I asked the judge if I could speak to you," Archer said. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of grief. "She allowed it. Said maybe it would do some good." Sebastian straightened his tie, a predator sensing weakness. "Mr. Payne, I assume my lawyer spoke to you?" "Your lawyer is in the hallway, vomiting into a trash can," Archer said. He moved closer. He didn't look impressed by the suit or the glare. "He didn't say anything, but I know men like you. You're thinking about money." Sebastian let out a breath. "Look, Archer. Can I call you Archer? What happened was a tragedy. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. But a long trial. It just drags out the pain. I can make your life very comfortable. I can ensure your remaining family never wants for anything." Archer stared at him. His eyes were milky with age, but sharp with intelligence. "You think you can buy my grief?" "I think I can buy your future," Sebastian corrected. $10 million. Cash. Tonight. All you have to do is tell the press that you think the storm was the primary cause. That's all. Just a seed of doubt. Archer let out a short, dry laugh. He reached into his pocket. Sebastian tensed, expecting a weapon. Archer pulled out a photo. It was battered, creased, and water-stained. It showed a young woman holding 2 toddlers. "This is my daughter, Sarah, and my grandsons, brave little Ty and sweet Malik," Archer said, holding the photo up. "They were in apartment 3B. When the floor gave way, they fell 3 stories. Then the 4th floor fell on top of them. I know the details," Sebastian said, looking away. "Do you?" Archer stepped closer. "Do you know that Ty was still alive when they found him? He was holding his brother's hand. He suffocated, Mr. Cole. He choked on your cheap dust." Sebastian felt a chill go through him. "I didn't kill them." "You signed the order," Archer said, his voice rising. $10 million? You could offer me the sun and the moon, and I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. I didn't come here to negotiate. I came here to look you in the eye and see if there was a man in there. Somewhere deep down." Archer studied Sebastian's face. He shook his head. "But there isn't," Archer concluded softly. "There's just a wallet in a suit." Archer turned to leave. "You're a fool!" Sebastian called out, panic rising in his chest. "You'll get nothing. I'll win. I always win, and you'll die poor and alone." Archer stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "I may die poor, Mr. Cole, but I sleep at night. Can you?" Archer walked out. Sebastian stood alone in the silence, the echo of the old man's words bouncing around his skull. He realized with a terrified clarity that money had finally failed him. The following morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from tense to volatile. The press gallery was overflowing. Protesters were chanting outside, their voices drifting through the thick walls. "Justice for the horizon! Jail the builder!" Sebastian sat at his table. He felt hollowed out. Gavin Hale looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "The defense is ready to present its case," Gavin said weakly. "Proceed," Judge Kennedy said. We move for a dismissal based on the argument that the structural failure was an act of God due to the unprecedented nature of the storm," Gavin said. "We have an expert witness, Dr. Vane, who will testify that the wind shear was beyond architectural requirements." "The wind shear," Darrow countered, standing up, "was 60 miles per hour. That building was rated for 90. It fell because the bones were brittle, Your Honor." Judge Kennedy raised a hand. "I have reviewed the expert reports. Dr. Vane's testimony relies on the assumption that the building was constructed to code. The prosecution has provided substantial evidence, including the defendant's own son's testimony, that it was not. She paused, looking at Sebastian. "Mr. Cole," she said, "throughout this trial, you have maintained that the Horizon collapse was a fluke, an anomaly. You claim that your other buildings, built with similar cost-saving measures, are perfectly safe." "They are," Sebastian said, finding his voice. "The Cole Pinnacle, the Cole Spire, they are standing, they are occupied. They prove my methods work." "The Cole Pinnacle," Kennedy repeated. "That is the residential tower on 4th Street, correct? Completed 6 months ago?" "Yes." "It's a masterpiece," Sebastian said. "And it used the same subcontractors? The same material supply chain? It utilized the same efficient resource management?" "Yes," Sebastian said, using the corporate speak like a shield. Judge Kennedy nodded slowly. She closed the file in front of her. She looked out at the bailiffs, then at the jury. "Current testimony suggests a discrepancy that cannot be solved by charts and graphs," Kennedy said. "The defense claims the materials are safe. The prosecution claims they are a death trap. I believe the court requires a more visceral understanding of the evidence." She banged her gavel. "This court is now in recess. We will reconvene in 90 minutes. 90 minutes? Gavin blinked. "Why?" "Because," Kennedy said, standing up, her robe flowing around her like the wings of a dark angel. "We are going on a field trip." "Where?" Sebastian asked, a sudden knot forming in his stomach. Kennedy looked him dead in the eye. "To the Cole Pinnacle. If it is as safe as you say, Mr. Cole, you should have no objection to the court conducting a walkthrough of the basement and foundation levels. Specifically the load-bearing sector that mirrors the one that failed at the Horizon." Sebastian's blood ran cold. The Pinnacle used the exact same grade C mix. He knew it. He had signed the order. He also knew that just last week, the maintenance super at the Pinnacle had reported hairline fractures in the support columns. He had ignored the email. "Your Honor," Gavin protested, "that is highly irregular. You can't drag a jury to a private residence." "I have already secured a warrant for a judicial inspection," Kennedy said, holding up a piece of paper. "And since the defendant claims it is a masterpiece of safety, surely he wants to vindicate his name by showing us the quality of his work." She leaned forward. "Unless, of course, you are afraid the building will fall on us, Mr. Cole." The trap was sprung. It was elegant, brutal, and inescapable. If Sebastian refused, he admitted the building was unsafe, validating the negligence charges. If he agreed, he risked walking into a structure he knew was compromised, potentially endangering himself, the jury, and the judge. Sebastian stammered. It's a construction zone in the basement. It's not suitable for civilians." "We will wear hard hats," Kennedy said dryly. "Officer Miller, arrange the transport. Mr. Cole will ride in the secure van. We meet at the Pinnacle at 11 a.m. "No!" Sebastian stood up, knocking his chair over. "You can't do this!" "Why not?" Kennedy asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Because it's dangerous!" Sebastian screamed. The silence that followed was absolute. Sebastian froze. He realized what he had said. He saw the court reporter, Kai, typing furiously. He saw the jury exchanging wide-eyed glances. He saw Archer Payne in the back row, slowly nodding his head. Judge Kennedy sat back down. She didn't look triumphant. She looked sad. "Let the record show," she said, her voice echoing in the stunned room, "that the defendant has characterized his own standing building as dangerous. However, the court requires verification. Mr. Cole, your objection is noted and overruled. If you are right, and it is dangerous, then the tenants need to know. If you are wrong, you have nothing to fear." She stood up again. "We are going to the Pinnacle. And Mr. Cole, you are going to lead the tour." Sebastian sank back into his chair, or at least the space where it would have been if he hadn't knocked it over. He was trapped. The Iron Maiden wasn't just trying him. She was forcing him to walk the plank of his own greed. "God help us," Gavin whispered. Sebastian looked at his hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about his money or his reputation. He was thinking about the weight of concrete. He was thinking about crushing darkness. He was thinking about Ty and Malik. And he was terrified. The coal pinnacle was a needle of glass and steel piercing the Chicago sky. From the street, it looked like a monument to human achievement, reflecting the clouds in its pristine facade. But as the convoy of black vans pulled into the service entrance, Sebastian Cole felt like he was entering the mouth of a beast he had starved. The group that descended into the bowels of the building was small. Judge Kennedy, the jury foreperson, a stern librarian named Mrs. Gable, Prosecutor Darrow, Gavin Hale, Sebastian, and a team of structural engineers. Officer Miller and 3 other bailiffs formed a protective ring. The air in the sub-basement was thick and cold, smelling of wet earth and unsealed cement. The hum of the massive HVAC systems vibrated in the floor, a constant low-frequency thrum that felt like a warning. "Flashlights," Kennedy ordered. Beams of light cut through the gloom. Sebastian walked in the center, his hands cuffed in front of him, his hard hat sitting awkwardly on his head. He knew exactly where to look to see the sins of his ledger, and he was terrified that they would look there too. "This is the main load-bearing cluster," Dr. Thorne, the engineer who had testified earlier, said. His voice echoed strangely in the cavernous space. He pointed his light at a row of thick gray columns. "These supports hold approximately 40% of the tower's dead load." Judge Kennedy walked up to the nearest pillar. She ran a gloved hand over the surface. It wasn't smooth. It was pitted, like the skin of an orange. "Is this normal texturing?" she asked. "No, Your Honor," Thorne said. "That is honeycombing. It happens when the concrete isn't vibrated properly during the pour, or when the mix is too coarse." Sebastian stared at his shoes. "Don't look up. Don't look up." "Mr. Cole," Kennedy called out. Sebastian flinched. "Yes?" "Come here." Officer Miller nudged him forward. Sebastian approached the column. "Look at this," Kennedy said, pointing her light at the base of the pillar, where it met the floor. There, running vertically up the column like a jagged scar, was a hairline crack. It was thin, barely the width of a dime, but it was there. And it was weeping. A small trickle of water was seeping out of the concrete, staining the floor dark. "Water intrusion," Darrow whispered. "Through the support itself." It's just settling," Sebastian croaked. "All buildings settle." "Settling cracks are horizontal, Mr. Cole," Thorne corrected quietly. "Vertical cracks under load mean compression failure. The column is being crushed by the weight of the building." A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the basement. Everyone froze. It sounded like a gunshot, loud and violent. Dust drifted down from the ceiling above them. "Move!" Officer Miller shouted, shielding the judge. "It's the pipes!" Sebastian yelled, his voice rising in panic. "It's just the heating pipes expanding. It happens every day at noon." "No," Mrs. Gable, the juror, said, her voice trembling. She pointed her light at the column next to the one Kennedy was inspecting. "Look." They turned. The crack on the second column had just visibly lengthened. A flake of concrete, the size of a dinner plate, detached itself from the pillar and crashed to the floor, shattering into dust. The building groaned, a deep, mournful sound of metal twisting and stone grinding. "Evacuate," Kennedy said, her voice calm but commanding. "Now, everyone out, slowly. Do not run." They moved toward the exit ramp. Sebastian couldn't breathe. The vibrating hum of the HVAC system now sounded like a death rattle. He realized then that he wasn't just a fraud. He was a murderer in waiting. The pinnacle wasn't a masterpiece. It was a time bomb. As they emerged into the daylight of the alley, gasping for air, Sebastian fell to his knees. The towering glass structure above him didn't look like an asset anymore. It looked like a tombstone. Judge Kennedy stood over him, removing her hard hat. "Officer Miller," she said, "call the fire marshal. I want this building condemned and evacuated immediately. No one sleeps here tonight." Sebastian didn't argue. He just wept. The return to the courtroom was somber. The adrenaline of the field trip had faded, replaced by a heavy, undeniable truth. There were no more outbursts from the defense table. Gavin Hale sat with his head in his hands. Sebastian sat like a statue, staring at nothing. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was packed to capacity, yet silent. Even the press seemed to hold their breath. "All rise," the bailiff said. Judge Kennedy entered. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She sat and looked at the jury. "Mrs. Gable," Kennedy said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the librarian said, standing tall. She didn't look at Sebastian. She looked at Archer Payne. "In the matter of the People versus Sebastian Cole," Mrs. Gable read from the slip of paper, "on the first count of involuntary manslaughter, guilty." A sob broke out from the back of the room. Archer's daughter-in-law. "On the second count, guilty. On the third count, guilty." Sebastian closed his eyes. Each guilty felt like a physical blow, a hammer driving a nail into the coffin of his former life. On the 12 counts of criminal negligence, guilty on all counts. Mrs. Gable sat down. Judge Kennedy looked at Sebastian. "Mr. Cole, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Do you have anything to say before I set a date for sentencing?" Gavin Hale stood up, his legs shaking. "Your Honor, we plan to file motions for—" "No," Sebastian said. Gavin stopped. "What?" Sebastian stood up. He didn't lean on the table. He didn't smooth his suit. He looked at Judge Kennedy, and then he turned around. He looked at Jace, who was watching him with a mixture of sorrow and shock. He looked at Archer Payne. "No motions," Sebastian said, his voice raspy. "I saw the cracks. I saw them today." He turned back to the judge. "I built it. I signed the papers. I knew." A gasp went through the room. A confession, finally. I thought because I was rich, physics didn't apply to me," Sebastian said, tears leaking from his eyes. "I thought I could negotiate with gravity, but I killed those boys. I killed them to save 3%. He looked at Archer. "I can't bring them back, I know that, but I won't fight this anymore. I'm sorry." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was the truth. "The court accepts your statement," Kennedy said softly. "Sentencing will be held tomorrow morning. Mr. Cole is remanded to custody." As the bailiffs led him away, Sebastian didn't fight. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy weight he had been carrying for years. The sentencing hearing was brief. The grandeur of the trial had evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of punishment. Judge Kennedy sat before a stack of letters, impact statements from the families of the victims, from the tenants of the now condemned Pinnacle who had lost their homes, from the community. "Mr. Cole," Kennedy began, "you stood in this courtroom a week ago and told me you wouldn't rise for me. You told me that your money made you untouchable." Sebastian stood at the defense table, head bowed. "I was wrong, Your Honor." "You were," Kennedy agreed. "But arrogance is not a crime. Negligence that leads to the death of children is." She adjusted her glasses. "There is a concept in law called restorative justice. Usually it is applied to minor crimes, but I believe it applies here. You have taken lives, Mr. Cole. You have taken homes. Prison alone does not fix that." She picked up the gavel. "I sentence you to 15 years in the state penitentiary for the counts of manslaughter. You will serve them consecutively, not concurrently. You are looking at a minimum of 45 years. Sebastian nodded. He expected this. he would die in prison. However, Kennedy continued, I am also seizing your assets under the Criminal Profiteering Act. The Coal Development Group is hereby dissolved. Its liquid assets, your personal accounts, and your properties will be placed into a trust. She looked at Archer Payne in the gallery. This trust will be managed by a board of the victims' families. It will pay for the rebuilding of the horizon. Properly this time. It will pay for the relocation of the Pinnacle tenants, and it will fund a scholarship in the names of Ty and Malik Payne. Sebastian looked up. His legacy wasn't just destroyed, it was being repurposed. The empire he built to glorify himself would now serve the people he hurt. And finally, Kennedy said, leaning forward, Mr. Cole, you are an architect by trade, are you not? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Because the prison where you are going has a workshop. They make furniture for state schools. You will not be sitting in a cell all day. You will work. You will build desks for children to learn at. And every time you drive a nail, every time you sand a piece of wood, I want you to remember the boys who will never sit at a desk because of you. Sebastian swallowed hard. I will, Your Honor. Then we are done here, Kennedy said. She looked him in the eye, and for the first time there was no hostility, only a grave solemnity. Good luck, Mr. Cole. May you find in humility what you could not find in wealth. Bang. The gavel fell one last time. Sebastian Cole was led away. He walked past Jace. Visit me? Sebastian asked, his voice small. Jace hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'll bring a sketchbook, Dad. Maybe you can learn to draw again. Sebastian smiled, a weak, broken thing. I'd like that. He was led out the door, into a life of gray walls and hard labor, but as the heavy oak doors closed behind him, the courtroom felt lighter. The air was clear. Judge Kennedy stood up. She gathered her robes. She looked at the empty defense table, then at the American flag in the corner. She gave a small nod to Archer Payne, who bowed his head in return. Justice had been done, not because of vengeance, but because the truth, like gravity, eventually pulls everything down to earth. The story of Sebastian Cole dominated the news cycles for weeks, but eventually, the cameras moved on. The real story, however, continued in the quiet work of the Payne Trust. New housing was built, sturdy, safe, and beautiful. Jace Young took over the design, ensuring that every beam and bolt was perfect. In a prison workshop 3 hours south of Chicago, an old man with calloused hands sanded a small wooden chair. He worked with a focus he had never applied to his skyscrapers. He checked the joints, he tested the weight, he made sure it was strong enough to hold a child. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was just a builder. And for the first time in his life, he was building something real. That is the cost of arrogance. Sebastian Cole thought he was above the law, but he learned the hard way that the truth always comes out, sometimes through a crack in the concrete, and sometimes through the courage of people like Archer Payne and Judge Kennedy. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how much money you have, you can't buy your way out of responsibility. True strength isn't in never falling. It's in admitting when you're wrong and doing the work to make it right. If you enjoyed this story and the battle between the Iron Maiden and the Billionaire, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What do you think? Did Sebastian deserve a second chance, or was the sentence too light? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.